Hello and most welcome to the lectures H696, and it seems that we are getting closer to the magic 700. Oh my, this is rather interesting. And I've been pondering what will have happened when we made the thousands. What we'll know then? Who will we talk to? Well, I think there's going to be loads of stuff to do in the future as well. And I think a new discovery here. What is reality now when it's not the boundaries, or not the combination of boundaries and non-boundaries? This is a new suggestion, and is to look at reality as action. What if we could perceive reality a bit like Pfeiffer is proposing? Pfeiffer, the Swiss engineer who constructs moving robots without a CPU, without a learning memory capacity. Everything in his system are coming from action. It's the movement that, so to speak, remembers. It's the movement that learns, and it's the movement that moves it as well. The intention comes from the movement. And this is, of course, incredibly weird, especially thinking of how used we are to the representative model. But this would mean that knowledge, intelligence and memory are all movement. And even the very word memory needs to be rethought. Memory is not about remembering something. And remember, that one did not make a division between intelligence, memory and cognition once. So it seems likely memory is not a specific thing. And these robots do not have a memory in the modern sense, the post-Newtonian sense. It has the idea of memory, intelligence and cognition together, never separated, therefore cannot be said to be memory either, actually. So the normal metaphor is of course a computer that sort of stores things of the outer world. And while this model is dead when it comes to cognition science, it's still the model that people have, and that's the reason they use the word memory a lot. They don't have any memory, or they want to have memory. And memory is about remembering things, occasions and so on, that gets stored somewhere. And you have to, so to speak, look into your memory bank and take it out somewhere. Doesn't seem that it is that way. But how would it technically be otherwise? Maybe we need a metaphor or a gestalt for how memory or cognition or intelligence, intention works. Well, I don't think it needs any, but I'm just going to put in a suggestion, an idea I had myself. And that is, we have in the movement a fractal space and a fractal time. That means inside the movement it's well enough memory space, so to speak. It's a very complex pattern, and that the movement can store memory things and bring it back to the next point. That's not a problem at all when it comes to fractal information. There are heaps more information in human movement or the robotic movement than to cover every computer in the whole world. Everything can be stored there, it's not a problem. And this is partly pointing to what Pfeiffer said. The movement is the knowledge. knowledge cannot be a stored part. There is a delay, it's not in the world, there's so many difficulties with that idea. Once we have an alternative, we can actually think about the whole idea in a more thorough way. Otherwise, once you're stuck with an idea, it's no looking at it because you're inside of it. And of course this shows even more how important memory training is, or what we call memory training. Because if it's intelligence and cognition and intention, why? We really need to train it then. Organize those fractal lines in your movement. We know we can translate movement into sinus curve because of the fractal dimensions both in space and time. You can imagine that makes for a lot of complexity. Complexity is what we need to sort of bring in something from one point to another. And actually it's a much neater and quicker storage. A storage that doesn't make actual storage place, and it doesn't divide between intention, memory and cognition. It's all in the same thing. And of course, I would say of course now, that's me adding it. Why wouldn't nature use that, since it's so much quicker and so much more effective than have this roundabout way of storage in the brain somewhere? It doesn't make any sense. I think we need to rewrite the idea even more. It's not enough just skipping the representational idea or opening it up. We need to go further. So you will have everything you want in the wave. Everything in the movement, information, calculation, analysis, you name it, it's all there. The clearness, the unclear, definitions, they are all movement. So I'm going to name this movement stored information, as long as we are putting stored into parentheses. It's not stored in the regular way. And the more consequences of this idea is, if movement were to be the foundation of reality, that would mean that the whole of language should be written with only verbs. These verbs would have to be authentic originals and not composites, ones like jag har en längtan att köra bil till Polen. I have a desire to drive a car to Poland. And that verb could be palmoskera. And that word cannot be taken apart, and you cannot say that that part means that subject, that object, that verb. It's a complete, it's a whole. It needs to be original as well, made from the beginning, and not meddled together with parts we already have. And this verb will have all the action, everything stored in itself, in the pronunciation already. So you hear here, that's one of the reasons it needs to be original, because just the original word can have that meaning. Of course, would have caused a problem for the one who want to construct a verb-based language made ex nihilo, so to speak, from nothing. It needs to be original. And other qualities would also have to be in these words. Adverb, adjectives. So, waiting to walk to the north. That should be droget, a word. And it would not be a suffix if it would have mean go to the south. It would be completely other word. You see this analytical mode that Greek developed. That is partly what's causing the problem. Because we start thinking, well, I add a little bit, and that means I want to go to the north, and I change that bit that always, in all cases, means want to go to the south. This is how we think, and in a way it's a reason our languages usually are called analytical languages. But this language needs to be genuinely, from the beginning, original with the sound and everything. And sounds are wholes that are not easily divided like that. And this is, of course, much more like quantum physics, that everything happens at once. They're not divided in singular moments, separate, discrete moments. It's a once experience. And then ex posteriori, one can take it apart and put it in causal order. But those are strictly two very different modes. So, could we go to remember? I think that's a clue that all these things, objects, adjective, and things, and even the modern verbs that are dependent on objects and subjects and adjectives and so forth, are coming from an original. You could call it the zero, a sort of potentiality. And that is not something that is passively looked upon. That passivity is a new trait. So one could say that it came from a wholeness, only with an H or a WH. One can compare this process of going from an original verb, an all-encompassing verb that contains all aspects, going into subject, verb, object language, or something similar. Things are starting to get a little bit more cemented. All of a sudden, the different parts are not as movable, flexible, vivid. The movement is disappearing. Things becomes more static. Objects are no longer connected to the subject, the adjective. They can be taken apart, they can decontextualized and recontextualized, like separate building blocks, like Lego. And they become closed off, static. They lose their incentive, because the incentive was in the beginning when words were action and the sound was the meaning. So there is a weakening of the sound as well, becoming less distinct. One could say it's a tired way of talking, machine-like, I don't know, but in that direction, in that neck of the woods. It's a lack of openness, it's a closed offness. The open sense of the body being open and perceptive taking in is getting shut off. The body closes as the words are closing in this development. And all of a sudden action is separated from language. It becomes a separate word. We start to think of action that is not always there. And action is something that moves around the objects. So all of a sudden action has been weakened, also diluted. It loses its momentum in the process. We get a denseness to coming to the core. Everything slows down. Well, there have to be objects now, and action is a lower word, so to speak. Something that happens beneath the essence. So and the things themselves lose their movement-like features. They beginning to lack their vitality. The colors dampen. The forms becomes obtuse. It's a deadened world. And you can liken this to a color photo from the 60s that slowly, gradually going from being vivid colored to becoming dampened and ending up black and white. All the distinctions disappears as well in this photo eventually. It becomes blurred with old age and exposure to sun. And this cementing tendency of the action to be reduced to objects is made stronger because action in itself, the force, the élan vital, is becoming one-dimensional. Time is here only a thin line. The Newtonian idea of time as just this lacking height, width, breadth, depth. And this takes away the force of time. Time becomes flattened. Time becomes a predetermined a priori as well, or something. We're treating time's flow as something ex posteriori, as if it was already past. I think that's more correct to say that, more clearer. One could say that time becomes appropriated, claimed. You claim it in advance, and it becomes muted. And this before time even had a chance of showing itself. So the ex posteriori has already come in effect before the flow of time. It's like we're telling time what it should do in advance, and these orders are all we see instead of the actual vivid three-dimensional development of time. And that, of course, is shutting off a lot of the energy in time. As I said, it becomes muted. And it causes a deadening feeling to time. Its force is anticipated and decided in advance. And that's the deadening process. It's not so much it's in advance, it's the deadening process, the grasping, the locking of the joints. And there is a specific order already developed, and vigor and spontaneity recedes to the background as time gets more and more claimed in advance. This is specifically evident in corporal movement. One anticipates the movement long before they had a chance to go in the correct order. Preconceived idea of how movement should be. One can say that action is no longer free-flowing anymore. And what usually happens is that one does not give ample time for the back to extend and widen. Instead, there is a preconceived, deceived postural attitude. We put an attitude, this is how time should develop. And we will not time movement well. There's no timing. It's like going into a football game and you say to yourself before, first I'm going to go left, then right, left, right, before the development of time. And I think this feeling is extremely strong among all of us. The idea that time is somehow already happened. The future is already here. I think that's the feeling of it. It's a little bit like Groundhog Day, isn't it? Yeah, that could be a good example. Have you seen that movie? Very good. Groundhog Day. The main character in that movie knows what's going to happen, and we are the same. Before it's even happened, we postulate and decide the force, the movement, the energy. We lift up the bag with all force and it's completely empty. And we think the whole world is already decided, everything is fixed. Action is no longer free flowing. We jump also in the movement. We jump to the last position. The object that we want to reach needs to be there already in advance. And when our hand should supposed to grab something, it's empty because it's no longer in the position that we thought. And this does not, and this is very typical, pointed out by Alexander as misuse. The body cannot have a preconceived movement. It can have a couple of orders, but we can't know what the body is going to be in the next position. So this whole idea of having a scheme in advance is a mistake of time. The movement will no longer be poised, beautiful, elegant. I think those are the words. There are no delicacies anymore. It's crude and harsh. It's a sort of wanting that's on the verge of being greedy. That's also this typical when you meet somebody in a tunnel or somewhere downtown, especially here in Gothenburg. They cannot adjust or anything because everything is already decided when they wake up in the morning almost. It's tough on the edges, sharp-edged attitude. Whereas a movement performed in time has a grace to it. It could even be called noble. To be with time is exactly this free-flowing, elegant movement, like the movement of a well-educated athlete. Well-proportioned, constantly adjusting accordingly to circumstances, which is much harder in an ex posteriori, pre-arranged time, where everything has already been played out in advance. Like a well-rehearsed theater play. That is something that makes it hard to adjust for changes, both in time and in space, of course. One is in a way of seeing stuck with a rigid plan that cannot be modulated to fit the occasion. It's a bit like the criticism made towards Field Marshal Montgomery from Eisenhower. He was rigid. It's something I don't agree with, but you see the point. That often perceived rigidity of Field Marshal Montgomery where he cannot take the troops back and all the plans has to be followed as they were from the beginning. No capability of adjusting. It's not a free-flowing. You answer before you even hear the question. You cannot wait for the right movement. It's completely out of sync. And this is a completely novel idea, I'd say, because we just, without thinking, says the clock time does everything. We forget that being in sync is the most important. And no clock time in the world can help us with that. We need to do it ourselves. I don't know how these people are thinking, but obviously haven't thought through the subject. And this is what we do here. We are opening up by thinking through. So let me show you this wonderful valley here in Keeles Park. It's astonishing. And here is this Art Deco Jugendwell, mystical, enticing, with a little light coming in. This is not the cave of Plato, I might add. And I say thank you very much and have a pleasant evening.